And here we are. We're live. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Pull up a seat, have a chair, relax a little bit. It's Friday, and you're on the Food Safety Chat. My name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. Of course, here with my esteemed guest, Jose Sabal of Sabal Food Safety Consulting. How are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing wonderful, Bryan. It's just so busy right now with all the things that are going on, especially with the regulations. It's just amazing.
Oh yeah, there's a ton. You're right, a ton of things going on right now. And
Yeah.
if you're joining us and investing this hour of time, we really appreciate it because this is something that needs to be discussed and talked about because food safety is just like everything in life. Either you're improving and growing or you're stagnating and declining, right? So this is part of your growth and part of your education. And what I love about the Food Safety Chat is being able to bring in experts like Jose, who, by the way, if you have a chance to take a class from Jose, do it. He's one of the best trainers out there. You're not going to find anybody better. And the enthusiasm you see on these chats with Jose, that's how he is in his classes. So you are going to get an incredible teaching experience with Jose. So make sure, if you can, to attend some of his classes. So if you're new, hopefully I didn't embarrass you too much, Jose. So if you're new to the Food Safety Chat, unlike Tim, who is joining us from the frozen tundra, we talk about all things food safety. And this is not a presentation. This is us having a discussion with you. And we love it that we're able to share knowledge and expertise because food safety is not a point of competition. This is something that we can all improve on and something that we learn every day. And I approach this like I approach when I go to a presentation myself or attend a webinar is if I get one new little thing out of what's being talked about, that's a win. And if I can execute against that, that's even better. So that's what we're going to do today. So Dawn, nice to see you, my friend. Go Eagles in Allentown. Nice. Yeah, I lived in Lancaster for a while in PA as well. So, yep, Philly Eagles are huge in that area of the country for sure. So, with that, one of the things that we love to do here on the chat is have a ceremonial sip of your favorite beverage with us.
Oh, yes. I have mine. I'm ready.
Excellent. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Good to see Cheryl. Hope your Friday is going well, Cheryl. So with that, well, we got a lot to talk about. I'm ready to dive in. Jose, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So how many times have you heard this? Hey, you know what? I'm SQF certified. I really don't need to worry about FDA because if I'm certified to that standard, I'm covered for recalls. I'm covered for supplier approval. Everything is great. Is that true?
Oh, I mean, the answer is going to be no. But it's an emphatic no. It's a no with, in bold and big. And so, no. And you know what, Bryan? To properly answer that question, the official definition of the word systems in ISO 9000 is interacting and interrelated elements. That is the definition of the word systems, exactly as it is written, okay? So basically, what you're saying is that within in this case for food safety, within a food safety system, you're going to have a bunch of elements that are just connected to each other. Mm-hmm. Those elements are, and I'm going to start naming some of them for food safety. The food safety plan is an element. The pest control is an element. The cleaning and sanitation is an element. Calibration, food defense, food fraud, you name it. Those are elements, okay? However, FDA has the same elements as SQF. Both of them, they have the food safety plan, they have the pest control, they have the calibration, they have all of them. But when you read the specific requirements of each element, they may not be the same. So there are certain things that are similar. I'm going to say similar. Some things are the same. Some seem similar, but there are some other things that are very different.
Interesting. And I know I used to work with, so Robert here is on from Frisco, Texas, as part of the SQF Technical Advisory Council. And when SQF would have their conferences, Bob Garfield would get this question all the time. Right? Somebody would raise their hand and say, okay, so if I'm SQF certified, I'm covered. And it would drive him crazy. It's like, no, 95%, you're probably going to match up. But that 5%, right, that's what gets you. And so in particular, we wanted to talk today about two elements that I think that people have the most confusion about, because, SQF is good and the other standards as well at putting together kind of, gap assessment comparisons, but I don't think it really sinks in. So today, if you saw the kind of the teaser here earlier in the work, what we're talking about is the first one is recalls. And then we're also going to talk about supplier approval. And I think kind of a subcategory on that, because I'd link those two together within systems, is FSVP. So we may throw in some FSVP, foreign supplier verification, as well. So let's dive into recall. And part of this, and I think a good place to start with this, Jose, is having a good procedure for recall and recognizing, and the way I always look at it, Jose, is there are two main areas for recall. There is the decision-making process and then the actual execution. So I break them up separately because a lot of time companies rush from one to the other, and you need to really take a deep breath between those two because there's some major decisions that fall from the first one. So quick overview of the recall process. So you have methods for how you find out from the marketplace if you have an issue. So consumers and customers may contact you. So end users, consumers, customers, maybe grocery stores, Walmart, things like this. Regulators may contact you. Your suppliers may contact you and say, hey, that material we sent you kind of had a problem with that. In all those different type of situations. And one of those two is your own plant may tell you and say, hey, we didn't do something we should have done. We think we may have put an allergen or something. Who knows, right? You have to be ready for all these different contingencies. And what the organization needs to understand is that if something that's a food safety issue potentially needs to be elevated immediately. Because sometimes it can get lost in the background. So consumers are contacting the company and saying, hey, I don't like the way your product tastes. And where do I find your product in the market? And can you send me a coupon? And lots of information coming into the company. But that one message in there that the consumer says, I ate your product and it made me sick. That needs to immediately be escalated to the head of food safety or whoever's managing that process for them to take a look at and say, ooh, this is not good, and begin investigating immediately to find out what's going on. And if there's any indication that there is an issue or potentially an issue, that person then needs to activate a process and say, okay, well, I need to pull in more people to investigate this. I want data from the plant. I want labels. I want sanitation records, whatever it is to look at that issue. Now, let's say you start looking at that, Jose, and there's an issue. Now the decision process comes together, and that group of team needs to go to senior leadership, and ideally, the head of the company, the CEO, and say, hey, listen, we have this issue, and walk them through that and say, we recommend that we do a recall of this product. And you have to be very careful at that point, because sometimes, and this is a little bit of a controversial topic on this side of it, and I'd be curious to get your opinion on this, Jose, and from the audience as well, is at that point in time, you need to gather, because once the horse is out of the barn, once you notify FDA or whoever that you're having a recall, you can't undo that. I've seen issues where you think something is happening and you let it settle overnight, and the next morning it's not an issue, right? So you have to be very careful when you move forward. But once you do move forward and you say, yes, we have a recall, then the execution piece of it begins. And things change radically at that point in time.
Yeah. So look at this, Bryan. The recall program is an element of a system.
Yes.
So I'm going to start by making sure that everybody goes first to the law, which is above the regulation. And the law says in the prohibited acts, in 29, 21, United States Code 9, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, it says that it is prohibited by law to ship to the market a product that is adulterated, and that is criminal activity. Okay, so this is very serious. This is not a game. And in a system, if you look at that case, you are going to say, okay, which are the chances that my product may get adulterated or misbranded, so I ship the product that way? Mm-hmm. And fundamentally, you just need to look at your food safety plan. I'm going to say fundamentally because the definition of adulteration is not just when the product contains a hazard. The definition of adulteration includes when the product is not in compliance with its own specification. Yeah. So for that reason, if the product contains a little piece of tiny hair, the product is adulterated. It's a class 3 recall for the FDA. Okay, that's something that people, we need to withdraw the product. No, you are recalling because the product is not in compliance with the specification. The definition of the word food includes that all of the ingredients that are being used for that product are food, and hair is not food. The product is adulterated by default. Yeah. So first is by making sure that everybody understands very well the definition of food, very well that is a prohibited act to ship any product to the market that is adulterated. And with that guidance is when you're going to say, like you said, it's not 100% easy, but you're going to say the product is adulterated because of this and this and this. We need to recall the product.
Right. Absolutely.
With that in mind, we need to understand GFSI. I'm going to say GFSI as a general approach. I don't want to name a specific one standard because it's the same. The benchmark requirements are the same for all of them. The benchmark requirement says you need to have a recall plan. And FDA also has the need, there is an element for recall. Now, in GFSI, you need a recall plan no matter what. If your products have or do not have any kind of a hazard, you need a recall plan. But in the case of the FDA, and this is the first change, you need a recall plan only in the case that in your hazard analysis, you identified at least one hazard that requires a preventive control, which is a new name for a significant hazard in HACCP.
Right. And yeah, there are rare instances where you don't identify hazards. There's very few products where that occurs, but it does occur. I'm thinking maybe vinegar, maybe,
maybe.
But who knows, right? It's always going to be dependent upon the operation. There may be hazards in your process, let's say physical hazards, where you have bad old equipment and you may have metal shavings in your vinegar. Yep. Who knows, right? And then that would trigger that you need to have that plan. To your point, kind of linking in this in too, Jose, with systems, is with this requirement that also then implies that you have to have training, right? And you have to train people on the effectiveness of these type of programs, right? Because these are systems and all of these things are linked together. So you have to approach them in some ways in this modular way of thinking, but everything needs to link together.
Yep, exactly right. So if you, in your hazard analysis, identify one hazard, you will need to set up at least one preventive control, up to the company to define what is the best approach for preventive controls, process, allergen, sanitation, and then the supply chain. Mm-hmm. And you must set up a recall program for the product. You must. At that point, it's mandatory by FDA.
Yeah. And we'll continue and we'll kind of tease out here as we're going through this, the differences between the two. So, okay, we have a recall situation. I've activated this procedure in this process. And this is where it starts separating. So under the GFSI standards, you're required to notify your certification body. It's like, okay, yes, having a recall. Okay, well, what's the product and these type of things? And they'll ask you a few questions and it's kind of it. Not the same for FDA. First thing you need to do is go to the reportable food registry. And is that required? Do you need to do that, Jose?
Yep. Yeah, you're committing a crime if you don't do this. It's a prohibited act not doing that.
Right.
And
Yep.
that is not required by GFSI.
Correct. And what will happen then behind the scenes with the reportable food registry is this will then go to the district that's responsible for that manufacturing facility.
Yeah.
And they will assign a crisis coordinator who will then reach out to you, and then that whole mechanism begins. And here's an interesting piece. You were talking about classes of recall earlier. Do companies, Jose, assign the class of recall, or does FDA?
Okay, so the recommendation of the FDA is that people are aware of the classification. Okay, it's not a requirement, but they need to be aware. Why? Because most likely the companies are the ones that will be identifying some instances of potential adulteration in their own operations. And hopefully, if that is identified, the product is not going to be shipped. Hopefully. But if the product is shipped, which is a prohibited act, that will make everybody in that company, especially the you of the company, which is the owner, operator, or agent in charge, according to the definition of the FDA, which is in the organizational chart, the person that is at the top of the organizational chart, that is the person responsible for that act.
Yep.
So that person, because of that responsibility assigned by the FDA, this is in the legal grounds. I remember that I'm not a lawyer. I'm just reading a lot about that. I need to say this. But there is a component in the law which is a strict liability, and that makes the top of the company the most responsible for that act. So that means that the person is responsible to make sure that when whatever is the problem is identified, somehow the company is going to more or less say, well, because it's a hazard, most likely this is going to be a class 1 or class 2 recall. But even though that the company says that, the FDA is the one that is going to have the last word in defining what is the classification of recall.
Absolutely. And FDA is going to need that information to decide, is this class 1, serious threat to human health or injury? Is it a class 2, or is, as you mentioned before, a class 3? I saw an issue earlier, it was in 2022, where there was a class 2 recall for listeria. And you would think, wow, why is that? Exactly. When you look at the issue, though, it was a raw agricultural product that is never eaten raw, and it has to be cooked. So FDA looked at the information and said, listeria in this product, normally it's a class 1, but based upon the circumstances of this, the likelihood of that causing this serious illness is not going to happen. So we're going to classify this as a class 2.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that's a very good point, Bryan, because any person right now, or most of the people right now, that will say, oh, I have a raw product and I have listeria in my raw product, and that listeria is environmental. 99% is going to be the reason. You are going to say, why? They're recalling the product. The product is going to be cooked, right? That's what everybody thinks. Well, hold on. You will need to go through the definitions of adulteration in the law, which are not in the regulation. And when you read there, if there is any added poison to the food, the product is adulterated. So that means that if you're making a raw product that may contain salmonella and may contain E. coli naturally from the ingredients, okay, that's acceptable. But if you allow an environmental hazard being added to the food, the product is adulterated, even though the product is raw.
Absolutely. And companies cannot rely upon the consumer to remove the risk. Oh, well, yes, we had this risk in our product, but the consumers cook it, right? This has come up time and time again. FDA says, no, no. You cannot rely on the consumer to control your hazard, period.
Yep.
Right? So FDA is going to be very clear on that. So you have these recall classifications. You're working with FDA. The wheels are rolling. Next thing you need to do is press release. Right? You need to let the public know, and FDA wants to be involved in that process as well.
And again, that is going to happen depending on the classification of the recall as defined by the FDA. So if you have a class 1 or class 2, you need to notify the public. But if you have a class 3, you just notify the FDA and that's it.
Exactly. And if you don't write the press release, guess what? FDA is going to write one for you, and you're not going to like it. You're not going to like it. So are those requirements of what we just talked about, classification and press releases, are these requirements under the GFSI standards?
GFSI do not require that people look for a specific classification. And under GFSI, it makes sense. Because remember that those standards are applicable in many countries around the world, and they may not have exactly the same classification of the FDA. So they cannot do that.
Right.
So what is the point here? The point is that at the end, we go back to what we have been discussing, Bryan, for years now, is that when you are developing systems, you need to understand all of the requirements. And people are going to end up developing what is called an integrated management system. You're going to integrate the requirements of the FDA or USDA or whatever is the regulatory agency in the country with the requirements of the standard, and then combine them and have one unique. For example, in this case, we're talking about recall. One recall program that is in full compliance with the requirements, of course, the standard of your choice, being SQF or BRC or whatever that is, and also the requirements of the regulatory requirements of the country of manufacture and the country of sale.
Very good point. And so if we're predicating this conversation around US and FDA, but it stops there. I mean, there's equivalency conversations that take place, but this is US law. So if I am Naeem, who is in Bangladesh, my laws are different.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So you need to understand that.
Potentially in a significant way, the outcome of the process.
Right. So as you're progressing through this recall process here in the US, we'll come back to the US. So you've notified FDA, they've made a classification, there is a press release. Now, part of what you're doing with FDA then as well is making sure that you're recovering and tracking all this product, right, Jose?
Can you repeat that? Just to make sure that I'm clear.
Okay, yeah, let me rephrase this. So you need to reconcile your inventory. So you contact FDA and you say, okay, we're recalling this product. You go through the mechanism we just spoke about, and FDA is going to say, okay, where did this product go? How much was sold? How much is still in your inventory? Are you going to return the product and have it destroyed? What's your plan? How are you going to manage this, right?
Yes. And of course, there is a section in GFSI saying, well, you need to somehow take care of the problem, okay? Which makes sense. But for FDA, it's very specific that whenever the company communicates with the clients, they need to say, for example, we are recalling lot ABC. And in that same communication, FDA says that you need to tell all of those that receive the product the ways that you are planning on how to dispose the product. That is part of that communication, but that is not required in GFSI.
Nope.
It's not. It's required only for the FDA. FDA also requires that your program has an effectiveness check procedure.
Yes.
So depending on your assessment, okay, we're going to recall 100 cases. Okay. If you say that, you are supposed to identify where those 100 cases are and then keep a daily count and daily contact your those that receive the product and say, hey, do you have a product? Well, I only have 20 cases out of the 30 that you send me. Okay, keep on going, keep on searching daily and calculate what is the percentage of the product that was already recovered. Most likely, I'm going to say that you're going to do this as an Excel spreadsheet. That spreadsheet is very likely that the FDA is going to be asking you to give them a copy of that. Right. You don't have that in GFSI.
No. And depending upon the severity of the issue, so let's say, for example, Jose, this 100 cases, you're going to bring this back and have it destroyed. Well, you just can't throw it in the dumpster behind your building. You have to send it to a sanitary landfill. And in a lot of cases, get certificates of destruction that you can show to FDA to say, yep, here's the product being ran over by a bulldozer at the landfill so that no one can eat it.
Yeah, and most likely, Bryan, whenever you are taking the product to the landfill, you are going to have the FDA with you just to make sure that, yeah, the product went there, give me a copy of the receipt, and so on.
Exactly. And this is something you need to think about too, right? With the changing supply chain, and COVID, Jose, really changed this landscape. Think about all
Yeah,
the food and things that we buy on Amazon or other sources. How are you going to contact those people who are buying your products through those channels?
yeah,
I will call out a really good example, which is Costco. Costco tracks all your purchases with your membership card. And
yeah,
if there's a recall of a product at Costco, they'll send you an email and let you, hey,
yeah,
you bought, Jose, this ice cream last
yeah,
month. This is a recalled product. Bring it back and we'll give you a refund.
yeah.
They do a very good job with that. So there's
Okay.
all these emerging channels that we need to be very aware of for tracking this product. Because if
Yeah,
you have a serious class 1 recall, Jose, the last thing FDA wants to see is, oh yeah, we have 100 cases of product. We found 50 of it or so. Well, where's the rest? I don't know. And again,
yeah,
kind of the overall discussion is this kind of this gap comparison between GFSI versus FDA. That's a big one. That's a big
yeah.
one.
Yeah, and you know what, Bryan? I don't want to deviate too much from the topic of the recall, which is what we're talking right now. But in the recall program, we're using another element in the system, which is the product identification program. Whatever, I'm repeating that element, I'm going to say. Oh, really? Yes. You need to be able to identify everything that is coming in, everything throughout the process, and everything going out, including packaging material. Because remember, by the way, the packaging material is, as defined by the food law in the United States, a food additive. And it's the responsibility of people to demonstrate that under the storage and transportation conditions and use and so on, there will be no migration of whatever is the substance being used, but it's food. So the packaging material is part of the recall.
Yep, absolutely. I remember an issue in Europe where, with Wheels of Brie, you have those little labels that are on top of the cheese. The ink went into the cheese.
Migrating to the cheese. Yep.
They had a big recall for that.
So it is very common, Bryan, that in recalls, once the recall started and the company says, we're going to be recalling lot code number 123. It is very typical that after notifying the FDA is going to the facility and they say, okay, why you are recalling 123? What was the reason for this? And FDA is going to start looking for documentation. If the company do not have a very strong identification program for all of the products and very good control over the documentation, that's when the FDA is going to say, you need to extend, the recall and include more product because you cannot identify exactly what was the source of this problem.
Excellent point. And that's another difference between FDA and the standards. FDA is going to come to your facility and make sure that you have correctly identified all of the product. So generally, I say bookends. So from CIP to CIP, and one of the things that FDA is going to come in and look at is things like rework and lot changeovers and your sanitation program. And a lot of times, and this is an interesting tip if you follow recalls like we do, is you'll see a recall in the market and you go, okay. And then 2 weeks later, you'll see an announcement from FDA that says so-and-so company is expanding their recall. That's why, because FDA came in and said, what you've identified as the product that is in question for this recall is insufficient. You need to recall more product. I saw a recall a couple of weeks ago, Jose, with a company that was making the little coffee pods that go in a Keurig or something like that. They had to recall 2 years worth of product. Everything that they manufactured had to be recalled.
Yep. Actually, Bryan, within a system, I audited, and you know it. I was an auditor for 9 years.
Yeah.
So when I was asking people in the element of water quality, okay, hey, what do you use to prove that your water is potable? Because it's the only water that you can use in a food facility.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm using the annual city water quality test. Really? Because if you do that and the FDA says you have a problem and the source was water, you will need to recall 1 year of product because that is your last good check.
Right.
So I don't know why people is using only, I mean, it's a good source of information, but as your only source, oh my goodness, not good.
Yeah, on that topic, yeah, we're diverging a little bit here, but are you testing your water at points of use?
Yeah, there you go.
Or do you have contamination in your pipes?
Yeah.
Happens, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things then that FDA is going to be looking for after they go through all these type of things are your corrective actions. And what are you doing to prevent a recurrence of this in the future? And all this information goes in your file as a company. And FDA is going to be on their next visit coming back to check on those corrective actions.
Yeah.
If you have a recall, is that a requirement to have that type of corrective action process in GFSI?
I will say that as a general approach, as the element, yes, of course, yes. GFSI requires corrective actions, and FDA requires corrective action. In my analysis, when I'm reading the official definition of the word corrective actions, I'm going to say most of the standard because they vary a little bit. You read BRC, you read FSSC, you read SQF, and the definition is a little bit different. Now look at this. Because FSSC is based on ISO 22000, the official definition of the word correction and corrective action is exactly as the definition of correction and corrective action in the ISO 9000 systems. Okay, of course, it's an ISO system. They're going to get it right. Okay. Now, I was teaching a preventive control for human food for a company in Brazil from Tuesday to yesterday. And they are FSSC 22000. So when we were going through the class, I just pulled the FSSC a few times just to compare the different elements, the requirements of the different elements. And I was very surprised that in the ISO 22000, you don't have the definition of a preventive action. Why I'm saying this? And it's because if you go to SQF and you go to the section of the glossary in the definitions, the definition of a corrective action, if you can look at the entire definition and cut certain pieces, they match exactly what is in ISO. The last sentence says, we are calling these also corrective and preventive actions. And I said, hold on, you cannot do that because the definition of a corrective action and the definition of a preventive action is different.
Yeah.
In the case of a preventive action is when you have a potential nonconformity. Let's say that you're going through your audit and you find a trend, and the trend indicates that in the future you may have a deviation. You need a preventive action. And what is the difference? In a preventive action, you're going to look for the root cause and then do something to prevent the occurrence because it has never happened. In the case of a corrective action, you are preventing the reoccurrence because it already happened to you. So they're not the same.
Right.
That is something that people don't know. How can you implement an effective system if you don't know the differences between those two?
Right. A quick example I use on that is pest control. So there's certain times of year where pest activity goes up. So let's say in the fall, mice are out in the fields and it's getting cold and they're going to come running into your plant. And you say, I'm going to prevent that from happening. I'm going to add additional traps. I'm going to add additional bait stations outside to prevent an issue from happening versus a corrective action, which is, oh, hey, look at that mouse in that thing. Okay, I'll clean it up and figure out what's going on. Right?
Yep.
You're predicting what's going to happen and preventing it from happening.
Yep. Which is exactly the scope. Oops. Sorry about that.
Someone has a question for you.
That's mine.
Here's another one. So thank you, Austin, for the question. I wonder what percentage of self-imposed recalls end up getting expanded by FDA. Is that more the exception or the rule?
What was that, Brian? I'm sorry. I was turning off the phone.
Oh, no, you're fine. So what Austin is asking here, when a recall is triggered, how often is that recall expanded as a percentage?
Oh my goodness, Austin, that will be a very good thing to measure. I have no clue, but if you look, the enforcement reports. The amount of updates of the regional enforcement report, the amount of updates is huge. It happens very frequent. Percentage-wise, I have no clue, have not measured that, but it's common.
Yeah. Yes. So as you look at these, a lot of these times, Austin, these are high-profile cases. So let's say, for example, big Olaf ice cream down in your neck of the woods, Florida. So recall happens, mechanism starts going, the company is resisting. Oh, no, we don't have a problem. We don't have a problem. And FDA's got to, start really taking severe action. And you will see that progress in the press releases because, FDA is looking at this through the lens of, okay, we need to let consumers know what's going on here. And because the company is not cooperating and removing product from the market and these type of things, we need to be very, very aggressive in how we're reacting to this recall. That's a clue. But a lot of times, really kind of what I was talking about earlier, the expansion notifications is a good way to kind of gauge that. And yeah, that's a hard thing to measure. And this is part of what I complain about here on the Food Safety Chat is that we need in the industry these type of post-mortem activities to be public so that we can learn from them and improve our operations. Because unfortunately, a company has an issue and they're like, oh, I'll recall, right? And they want to move on. They don't want to air their dirty laundry in public and say, oh, here's a listing of all the things we did wrong. Nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, but you know what, Bryan? I believe that a lot of people are getting into the food industry without understanding the basics. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you decide to say, okay, so I'm going to open an ice cream factory in Florida, the first thing that people should be doing is, okay, so what is the food law? What is adulteration? What is the definition of food? What is misbranding? Does that law carry criminal consequences? And understand what are you getting into first. And then is when you say, okay, I understand very clear now that I cannot put any product in the market that is adulterated or misbranded because I'm going to be a criminal. And once you do that, and okay, I'm going to set up my ice cream company. If that owner has that approach and the FDA says, I have evidence that your product contains listeria, oh my goodness, that guy is not going to recall only the product that is out. That guy is going to close the facility and not ship anything until they perform a super deep clean and take care of that listeria.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good question. So yeah, we need more information on that side. So let's kind of switch gears now because I think we've done a great job here talking about the differences between recall, between quality standards with the GFSI as an example and FDA. So the other side of that then too is supplier approval. Right? So big differences there too, Jose. How about we'll start with vendors. How about vendor approvals? What's the differences between the two?
Okay, Bryan, we are going to start this section of the chat by saying that the approved supplier program is an element in GFSI and in the FDA. But the requirements are not the same, and we're going to start talking about the differences in those requirements.
Yes.
Okay. So in order to start talking about supplier approval, I need to first say this. The definition of a supplier for GFSI is anyone that is providing the site, the company, with products or services. And those products are not just ingredients and raw material. That includes also the chemicals and all of these other things. For FDA, the official definition of a supplier is the company that is manufacturing or processing the ingredients that the company is receiving, or raising animals or growing crops. So if you are purchasing something, and I'm going to say from Cisco, from US Foods, from Cheney Brothers, from any, distribution warehousing company, for GFSI, they are your suppliers. For the FDA, they're not your suppliers. You will need to go one step back and look for the one that manufacture, grew the animal, or raise the animal, or the crop, group the crop.
Yeah, huge difference, huge difference.
Huge difference.
And we're seeing that as well in the new rule around enhanced traceability that everybody's talking about. When you're going back to the system, FDA is saying you need to be able to go backwards through your system from point of consumption to manufacture, right? And then what we're talking about now with suppliers, from manufacturer to who is actually producing the food, not who's distributing it. Same thing.
Yeah. So according to that definition, Bryan, look at this. In GFSI, you're going to basically approve everybody. What is the typical approval process? Well, you need to somehow determine if your supplier is benchmarked against any of the other or the same GFSI as you. That is the approval process, because that is somehow an indication that there should be a little bit of consistency on what they do, hopefully to prevent receiving an ingredient that is adulterated or misbranded. Now, in the FDA side, the approval of the supplier depends on the hazard analysis. If you go to your hazard analysis and you identify at least one hazard that requires an approved supplier program, that requires a supply chain preventive control, your preventive control is going to include two things. Number one, the approval of the supplier before purchasing the product, and then with certain frequency. And the frequency is going to depend on how well is the supplier, how well the supplier is doing. I'm going to get into this in a second. The second thing is that once you approve the supplier, you are supposed to look for one of the, I'm going to say one of the three, there are four options, but one of the three, which are very well defined, you need to use on-site audits of your supplier. You need to use sampling testing of the product, and you need to eventually use record review of your supplier's activities to control the hazard that could be present in the product that you are receiving. Typical problem when you do this, typical, Bryan, I mean, it happened to me already several times. You identified hepatitis A in blueberries from Argentina. Why? Oh, because there are many recalls of blueberry because of hepatitis A. And hepatitis A by default is a hazard that requires a preventive control. It's a high-risk hazard because it's happening. Okay? So I'm going to put here in the United States in the FSBP hazard analysis, hepatitis A. And I'm going to ask my supplier, hey guys, can I see your hazard analysis? And when I'm looking at their hazard analysis, they don't have hepatitis A. They're still controlling disease with the GNPs. You cannot control a significant hazard with a GNP.
Interesting. Now you notice here as well that Jose threw an FSVP. So what's that? Foreign supplier verification. So an additional layer of information that needs to be required under regulation.
And you know what, Bryan? That is another thing that there is a lot of a misconception. When the FDA says that if you identify a hazard in the hazard analysis that requires a preventive control, a significant hazard, and the hazard is actually controlled by the supplier, you just need to approve the supplier and verify that the supplier is doing a good job. And companies are supposed to select the on-site audits whenever high-risk hazards are identified. That is the by default audit. That's what is written. Now, what kind of audit is this on-site audit of the FDA? It's not a GFSI audit. It's not. It's a regulatory audit. It's an audit based on the regulations that are applicable to that supplier of yours.
Right.
And be careful, because if that supplier of yours is a manufacturer, but the hazard that your product may contain is controlled by the supplier of your supplier, you're supposed to be going all the way there and approve that one for that specific hazard. That you don't have that in GFSI.
No. And so there's two levels here under supplier approval. So under GFSI, broader from the standpoint of you need to approve all vendors and suppliers. So your sanitation company and your pest control company and all, your janitorial company for your operation, all these type of things. Both of them are looking at, as you talked about, Jose. So if you're producing ingredients or growing or raising animals or growing crops, right? Those FDA is looking at differently. And then this falls under the banner then also of where is it coming from? If you're buying ingredients from foreign countries, what are the regulations that are applicable there? And how do you overlay that with the requirements here? Because as we mentioned earlier, in some cases you have equivalency. So New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, FDA said, okay, these are good food programs and we recognize those as equivalent to ours. You're still not off the hook though. You still need to do the work and identify the hazards.
Yeah, of course, 100%.
Yeah.
So as you can see, Bryan, I mean, if you're going to be approving a supplier and you need to, let's say that you decide to use an on-site audit. Well, let's go through the details.
Okay.
How those on-site audit works. If you go to the another FISMA regulation that is called the Accreditation of Third-Party Certification Bodies to perform audits in supplier, that regulation is asking for on-site audits of foreign suppliers, not companies in the United States. Why? Because the companies in the United States are inspected directly by the FDA or, the Memorandum of Understanding with FSIS. But companies here are inspected locally. They don't need the formal on-site audits description for foreign suppliers. And now people outside the inside the United States too, but especially outside the United States, there is something very unique that the FDA is going to start using a lot, the RRAs, the remote regulatory audits. And they're going to contact companies in whatever, South Africa. Guys, we're going to perform, we would like to perform a regulatory inspection of your program. FDA is going to say, this is not mandatory. This is just voluntary. But guess what? You reject an RRA of the FDA, and it's very likely that your products are not going to be allowed to pass the port.
Right. So FDA has created systems to say, okay, we have control and authority of this area, United States, but we have all of these things coming in. Therefore, we're going to require, once things come into the country, that you meet these regulations. And if you don't, we're not going to let you in. And we're going to yank your registration and all these type of things that they can do indirectly. Whereas what we're talking about with GFSI and other standards that are international, that doesn't apply.
Yep.
Right? They're covering everything. And to your point, that's an advantage and a disadvantage because those regulations need to be written in a generic, not regulations, those standards need to be written in such a way that they cover everything. So you can't be specific of what we're talking about, like with FDA, which is why we're doing this comparison today.
Yeah. And Bryan, just as a quick topic, who is according to the regulation 117.180, official responsibilities of the PCQI, who's the only one that can develop the food safety plan? Who's the only one that can go through the hazard analysis? Who's the only one that can identify the right preventive controls? Who's the only one that will be validated as necessary? I hate that portion, but it is what it is. It's written like that. Who's the one that is going to verify the effectiveness of all of these controls? Only the PCQI. So when I'm going in this case, hey, we need to approve this supplier of yours. Okay, ask them who there is the PCQI. Oh, we don't have a PCQI here. We have a HACCP team leader according to our SQF program. I'm sorry, you are not in compliance with the regulation. And not because the training is mandatory, because it's not. The definition says that the PCQI can, implement the program, just learning and understanding the laws and the regulation. But the approach is so different. Using the 7 principles according to the preventive control is so different from the regular hazard approach that is very not likely that someone is going to be able to implement an effective food safety plan according to the preventive control regulation unless they go through a class and understand the background, not only of the regulation, but the laws.
Yes, 100%. So between the two comparisons here, under standards such as GFSI, are you required to be a preventive control qualified individual?
No.
Nope. They have their own requirement. You need to be a practitioner, a SQF practitioner, or a practitioner on the other standard. Very different than a preventive control qualified individual.
Actually, Bryan, look at this one. For the food safety plan, according to the regulation, the only person that can sign the food safety plan is the owner, operator, or agent in charge, is the one that is at the top of the organizational chart. That is the person that signs. According to GFSI, the SQL practitioner, the HACCP team leader, the food safety team leader, that's the one that signs. But It's not the same person.
Yep. And a little tip on that, I have seen where FDA has written up companies for 483s because they didn't sign.
Yeah, of course.
Yep. So be careful for that. So Austin had a question here around the suppliers. How is it that large companies continue to get accused of using suppliers that utilize child or slave labor? It seems like they would have at least one person on staff responsible for vetting the supply chain from top to bottom.
Oh my goodness. I'm not an expert there, Austin, and that is a very good question. The only thing that I can say, because you know that I'm coming from South America, okay, and I have traveled in many different places, and you know what? In many countries, if you start working young, your parents are going to allow that. It's no problem. And if you are 12 or 13 and you start working in the family business, that's fine. It's not a crime in those countries. It's not a problem. I will be concerned if we have some kind of a slavery approach. At that point, I will say yes. But I believe that we should be very careful in not getting into something that is not right. Okay. I don't have any problem personally in having any person of any acceptable age, I'm going to say, working in doing something right if there is an approval and there is protection for that person.
Right.
I will say that is fine. But if you have a slavery type, oh my goodness, that is, and I don't care about the age at that point. You may have people that are older and they're just slaves. That is just wrong. It's not about the age.
Right. No, I agree. And yeah, auditing that, right? Once you get into the criminal side of things, to your point, Jose, where you have slaves and people being forced to work against their will and things like this, those people are going to hide those activities, right?
Yeah.
You can't send them a questionnaire and say, hey, do you have any slaves that you're using? Well, what are they going to say? No.
Yeah.
No, never mind.
No.
Right. And so those, very challenging questions, but that's a good side point, Austin. Thank you. So PCQI developing the system, that's a big difference. What about continuing to use an improved supplier if you identify something, adulteration at receiving or things of this nature, and you reject it? Can you just say, here's a bad lot of material?
Oh my goodness. Yes. So the basic recommendation from FDA is that let's say that you identified in your hazard analysis one hazard that is controlled by the supplier. Supplier according to FDA definition, guys. Okay, so be careful. So you have that supplier. So then you go through the process of approving the supplier before receiving the ingredient. You approve them. You go into the FDA website and you start asking questions about if they're following the regulation, which is one of the main questions. Is that's a main reason why I'm always asking about the PCQI certificate. That is the most likely way that you're going to have a system that is following, regulations. So you approve them according to those. You decide what is the verification activity, and then at some point you receive the product. Okay? So what is the responsibility? In GFSI, do you have a procedure? Do you have a requirement, an element that says you need a procedure for the receiving of the food? Yes, you have one. Yeah. So what is the procedure in the case of the FDA? The FDA is a little bit different. Why? Because in GFSI, you're going to be basically checking transportation conditions and environmental conditions inside the container, the truck or the trailer or whatever that is. And fundamentally, that's it. Whatever is the product that is there is going to be received. In the case of FDA, if you identify that hazard in the hazard analysis and the hazard is controlled by the supplier, the person that is receiving is supposed to check that the product is coming from the facility that was approved. So look at this example, Brian. Let's say that we're going to make sandwiches and we're going to use mayonnaise. And I'm going to say I'm going to call Kraft to provide the mayonnaise. And let's say that I'm here in Miramar in Florida and there is a Kraft facility right here in whatever, in Miami. I'm going to call them. Hey, guys, do you have mayonnaise? Yeah, we produce mayonnaise here. Okay, can you please, I'm going to be sending you my questionnaire. I need your GFSI audit, and I need you to show me a copy of your last audit and whatever are the approval process for GFSI. I got everything. I got the product. And when the product is coming in, the person that is receiving, according to FDA requirements, is supposed to verify that that product is coming from that facility that I approve in Miami. The bill of lading is going to say the product is coming from Atlanta. You cannot receive that.
Yeah.
You have a problem. Because it's not the facility that you approve, even though that the product is the right one, but it's not the facility that you approved. So yes, FDA has another, I'm going to say kind of a way to go out of this, saying in emergencies, you can do that. But that was not an emergency. That was something that was planned. You approved the supplier. They told you that you're going to be shipping. The responsibility, the person that is going to be catching those things is the one that is receiving the product. So if that person is not trained in identifying which are the products that may have hazards that are controlled by this supplier, for which you at the receiving will need to verify that it's coming exactly from that supplier and that the product matches its own specifications, GFSI not going to work.
Right. And yeah, so that's a really good point. And this is a good thing to kind of bring this together, is that, again, right, FDA is saying you have to get through the middleman to go back to is actually manufacturing the ingredient, growing the animal, raising the crop, and figure that. We see this a lot of times with brokers, right? The broker is none of those things, right? And brokers a lot of times will ship from different locations. No. You need to go back to the source. And another little wrinkle on that too, under foreign supplier verification, if you're buying product from a sister company in your own company, you need to approve them.
Oh yes, it's a different facility. Of course, yes.
Right. Craziness.
Yeah.
So we'll bring this back up to the 30,000 foot here, Jose. Oh, boy, hopefully we've been able to illustrate just from going through a few of these points, the differences. And you need to be aware of these, because if you think that one or the other is simply going to cover you in these areas, no, it's not. And as you go back and think about what we talked about here today, this is one of the things I love about Jose when I have him on, is his thinking methodology with this. He always thinks in a hierarchy. So what did the laws say? What did the regulations say? What are the definitions? A lot of times when we look at standards, we go, the definitions, I'll just skip all this part and get to the good stuff. The definitions are key. And you'll notice that Jose always goes back to those, which is brilliant. I love that. So everybody, please use that model as a best practice. Understand what the rules of the game are. What are the rules, and what are they defining? Because that sets everything that we talked about here, Jose.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. So excellent questions, everybody. Thank you. We'll keep on time here. And once again, the hour is gone. Ooh. And amazing topics. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up here in closing is the locals group. So in the locals community, it's free. And we have a site there where you can join and get information. And from last week, I normally don't do this, but I wanted to bring this up because Corey Muse from last week, we talked about whistleblowing and the process with that, Jose. And she put together a summary page of everything that we talked about. And I posted that in the locals group for everybody. So that's free. Go out and get that information. And thank you to Corey for that and doing that. And again, that's the Food Safety Foundation.locals.com. And I'm putting that here in the chat. So everybody's got that. Hopefully LinkedIn doesn't remove it. Sometimes they do. They don't like you going to other sites, but that's okay. So any closing thoughts, Jose?
Oh my goodness. I'm going to say, Brian, the same thing that we have been saying for years now. The regulations and GFSI are not the same. They are extremely different. And even though that you mentioned from SQF bill, that they, well, maybe the SQF is 95% and you still not. I will say that SQF is going to be kind of a 60%, any GFSI, 60% about that, but you have a huge portion. Now, I don't care if the difference is just 1%. If you're not in compliance with that 1%, you're done.
Right. You're going to get a 483.
Yeah.
So be aware of that. So with that, everybody, we'll close out the chat for this week. Again, thank you for being here. Thank you for making this so much fun. We do this for you to help share this information, and it is an amazing experience for us as well. So thank you for investing the time, growing your food safety knowledge, and hopefully giving you a little bit to think about here this week. I know that I've got a lot to think about here too. So join us back here next week for the Food Safety Chat. So again, we live stream on LinkedIn, Facebook, not Facebook anymore. So LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. There we go. And we love these questions. We do this for the interactions. And thank you for everybody. Austin, Alexis, everybody, thank you for joining us. And we'll see you back here next week, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, where I'm at in Colorado, 10 a.m. Eastern, where the magnificent Jose Sabal is located in the East Coast. And we'll see you back here next week. So everybody, enjoy your weekend. Have a great one. And we'll see you back here next Friday. Thanks again, Jose.
Have a nice weekend.